This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Hi, curious minds out there in our ever-expanding radio land. Welcome to CC with BB, Connecting with Coincidence with Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD. That's me, the only radio show in the world dedicated to the study of coincidences, synchronicity, and serendipity. We are coming to you through the X-Zone Broadcast Network, located in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and broadcasting all over the world. What is the relationship between mind and brain? Does brain produce consciousness, or does the greater consciousness produce the brain? How do mind and brain interact with each other? I'm a psychiatrist. I study this question in my office. I help people with medications and psychotherapy. I work in both the brain and in the mind. You need your mind to recognize a coincidence and your brain to talk about it. Coincidences are like messages in a bottle. The message can be about you, and the message can be about where the bottle and message came from, that sea of infinite possibilities. Synchronicity spoken here. The phrase connecting with coincidence is my brand. It is the name of my book, my Psychology Today blog, my website, and my social media sites. To find any and all of them, please put Connecting with Coincidence in your search engine. Would you like to know how sensitive you are to coincidences? Take the Weird Coincidence survey on my website. How can coincidences be explained? The standard answers are God and random chance. The trouble with these standard answers is they exclude you and me. We have something to do with creating coincidences. First, a conscious mind needs to notice them to make them real. But what else do we do sometimes to make a coincidence happen? Perhaps, as author and psychologist Gibbs Williams says, and I agree, sometimes we use coincidences to help us solve our psychological problems. But how do we explain the not uncommon experience of feeling the pain of a loved one at a distance, or having the same dream as someone else, or knowing that something specific will happen or is happening some distance away? For example, there was a lowly member of a high school class named Winston who took a preliminary exam to be placed in a much sought-after position. The exam seemed to require special effort on his part because so many people were better prepared and he had failed before. He knew that among many things, they would be asking him to draw a map of a specific country. The students didn't know which country, however. The night before the exam, he put the names of all the countries in the world in a hat and drew out New Zealand. He carefully memorized that map. The first question on the exam was, draw a map of New Zealand. He received very high marks. That student was Winston Churchill, the former Prime Minister of England, and the test got him into the military, which provided an essential step toward his becoming Prime Minister of England. Winston had several other reported coincidences. He showed up in the right time in the right place to get a job he wanted in the military. He was escaping the Boer War in South Africa, where he had been held prisoner, and just happened to knock on the right door after escaping among many enemy doors he could have selected. In World War II, he walked away and twice a shell hit where he was. And he also got in the other side of the car once when a bomb would have murdered him had he got in on the other side. Talking about these coincidences, Churchill said, "I have a feeling that some guiding hand has interfered." We use words associated with these experiences like extrasensory perception or psi, but we do not have an accepted theory of psi. Jungians want to include psi under synchronicity, the supposed acausal connecting principle. So we're left with a common human experience that has no theory behind it. Our guest today will help make sense out of understanding some of these. Sally Rhine Feather is a retired clinical psychologist who traces her lifelong interest in parapsychology to growing up as the daughter of JB Rhine and Louisa E. Rhine, founders of modern parapsychology, and close correspondence with Carl Jung. She worked as a research assistant at the Duke Parapsychology Lab before and after earning a doctorate in experimental psychology. After retirement, Dr. Feather returned to work at the Rhine Research Institute and has authored the book The Gift, 2005, and received in 2010 Outstanding Career Award from the Parapsychology Association. Her colleague Susan Freeman, who is with us also today, has worked at the Rhine the last 8 years as program director and public relations person. She is involved with archiving the historic writings and articles of the Rhine Institute collected over the 85 years and works closely with Dr. Feather in the qualitative analysis of the spontaneous reports, both historic and current, that come to the Rhine. It's a great pleasure having them here. We will return to talk with them in our next segment after a short break.
Can we pass that one?
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Well, welcome back to CC with BB, the only radio show in the world dedicated to the study of coincidences. And our guests today are Sally Rhine Feather and Susan Freeman from the Rhine Institute in North Carolina. What a delight to have you both with us. And Sally, the historical essence that you bring to this discussion is superb. So let's talk about you and the Rhine and your history. Tell us about your involvement with your parents growing up doing this supposedly crazy stuff and coming up with beautiful data to suggest to the world that the numbers are there. Can't you pay attention to them? And still getting people saying, no, it didn't happen, and you know it's true. And tell us about a history of you and the Rhine, please.
Well, your last sentence just sort of summarized a lot of the feelings that go on, and you grow up in a strange world like mine was. It didn't seem strange. It seemed like any other kid's life until I got old enough that people began to tell me what my parents were doing was unusual. I enjoyed it very much because I got to meet interesting people. Like you'd come by, I would have seen you when, and interacted just on a normal basis with a lot of very interesting people from all over the world. And of course, got to participate in the early ESP experiments. I'm talking about the lab studies in those days. It was really all about the science. It was only in my teenage years, which would have been in the later when my mother got back into the field, that we began to talk about these, what you're calling coincidences. We would just call them psychic experiences that people kept sending in from the very beginning. This was a place where even if they're doing experiments with cards and all that, still they're studying things like telepathy and clairvoyance, and the whole world is interested in experiences of that sort. Whatever names we use them, whether you even say coincidence, people want to tell you about them. So the early parapsychology laboratory at Duke was the go-to place for sending your account. Where somebody might pay attention to you, at least they were studying it.
Yeah, that impulse to try to communicate with someone, because it makes some people feel a little crazy to tell others about them, and they say you're wrong.
Right. That's something that Susan and I still find today. It hasn't changed one bit. People
Really?
are calling us, as she can tell you, calling frantically or writing. We prefer when they write. But it's still the same questions. Am I normal? What does this mean? Etc.
Yeah. Frank Basciuti here at
Yes.
He is a psychologist in Charlottesville who gets referrals about people who are having experiences like this and tries to help them normalize it. I think that in the younger population that I'm in contact with here in Charlottesville and UVA, these experiences are much more accepted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think there's a cultural shift, at least as maybe manifested by some of the younger people that I talk with here. I hope so. We need to have it better accepted as something people do. I mean, I've got a patient who's got a friend from college who just keeps doing telepathic things with him, like having the same dreams, or saying, "Aren't you at a lake now?" And when he didn't tell her that, I really like the stories of people who are communicating it this way, and they kind of know it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you said what you did about the young people. They also need, of course, the media has affected it, and I don't know sometimes which comes first. After certain television programs, we might get more calls or contacts. That's generally good. Sometimes it's over the top, as you know, and you have to bring it down and help people, as you say, normalize it, not allow them to go too far out into outer space, because we don't know that much yet about outer space.
I think we're going to find somehow that outer space and inner space have some connections with each other.
Absolutely. That's what synchronicity comes in, doesn't it?
Well, that's where psi comes in too, and that's the discussion we'll probably get to. But I mentioned some stories about Winston Churchill, and I heard you and Susan talking about them, and you have some other stories that I think are worth telling. I always liked the Ruth story, which was in your book, The Gift. To me, that was an example of what was called PMIR, psi-mediated instrumental responses from Rex Stanford, but I call human GPS. What do you that be able to get to the right place at the right time to get what you need? It takes a little more movement rather than what the other side things tend to be standing still things. So, but tell us some stories that you would like to share with the audience.
Right.
Well, I was talking about the Winston Churchill experiences because it reminded me of a number of reports that have come in from one particular man in his 90s now. And all of his life, he was what I think you might call highly sensitive to experiences, that he decided he went through different feelings about what was causing these things, whether he was psychic, telepathic, or what he came down to was a guardian angel that saved his life on many times, whether he was drowning or got out of the way remarkably from a huge boat in the war. Numerous accounts of him saving not only his life but the lives of others. But the reports that we get here are pretty phenomenal. And over the years, when they say it's not veridical evidence, but when you read thousands of them, you just got to scratch your head and say nobody could make this stuff up over the years.
Here's what I'm doing, and I want to ask you about what you're doing. I am putting together my coincidence reports, many of which are psi, but some of which I would put in other categories. But that's a different question. Right now, I'm just trying to describe the processes of coincidences, like getting out of the way at the right time, like help arriving right when you need it, like running into the right person at the right time for you. These are different processes, of which I've got a whole bunch of them. And I'm wondering, in the stories you have, you must be seeing patterns of the stories. And it's those patterns accumulated by the multiple stories that become the science of coincidences and telepathy and psi.
Well, thanks to Louisa Rhine's work, she diligently classified these into categories such as clairvoyance, telepathy, and precognition, which is 3 of the main subjects that we study, called general ESP. And if you follow those categories, then as we're reading specific reports, we can sort of put them into the categories that we think they're most appropriate for. So, clairvoyance or intuitive seeing, I can give you an example of that. A woman was cooking food and she took off her rings and she lost her rings and couldn't find them. Was very upset about that, but then she had a vision, so to speak. She saw in her mind's eye her rings in the bottom of an ice cube. Now, where that came from, she wasn't sure, but she looked in the freezer in the ice cube tray, and her rings were in an ice cube, in the ice cube tray. Uh-huh. So try to put that together. I mean, we would call that clairvoyance or intuitive seeing. Telepathy, as you said, is mind to mind. So one woman was in her house doing some things when she kept hearing her mother call her repeatedly by her childhood nickname. And her mother lived 15 miles away. There was no way she could be hearing her. But the most important thing was she took action or had conviction, as Louisa would call it, got in the car and drove to her mother's house, only to find that her mother had fallen and was seriously in danger of dying, had the person not come to help her. And she said she's been calling her name for the last hour, the nickname. So that would be telepathy to us.
Yeah.
And of course, there's precognition, of things that people know are going to happen. Around 9/11 and the tsunami, we got calls, people saying, I've had this dream about a burning building or water rushing in, and I don't know what to do about it. And of course, we don't know what to do about it either. But in hindsight, you look back and say, geez, we got a number of those kinds of calls around these particular times of tragedy. So we have all kinds of experiences that we sort of lump into things like that. Sally, do you know?
Well, I was going to say, I think my mother's work, and of course it took her decades and thousands of cases to come to these conclusions, it was a basic classification. She was basically a botanist, and so classification was the first order of things. It's just the beginning because, of course, the telepathy cases, as you know, all of them range in different ways. You're looking at it in other ways, which I think are very important and interesting, and we'll learn more about your work too. We are hoping ourselves to, what we've been searching is to find waking intuitive cases that we could do qualitative analysis, sort of like phenomenological, look at people's words and see, can we get any clues as to what triggers things? Now, sometimes it doesn't. Is somebody just suddenly knows, like the woman who ran to save this child from falling into the water hole. Other people have a vision, they see it in their mind's eye, or they have an actual vision we might call hallucination, where there is nothing there, but they see their departed grandmother saying, get to the water hole. There are various forms of ways things can occur, but what meaning can we find of these various differences? But first we have to get them together and sort them out, and that's, again, what we're doing on top of what she already did.
One thing we did find out in a preliminary study, we've mentioned it a little bit, is that generally most people are confused or frightened by the experience, even if the outcome is positive, even if someone's life was saved or something beneficial happened. It still scares them because they don't understand what happened.
I think that's a subset of people that may contact you, but I have contact with people, including me, where I have experiences like that was fairly new to me at the time, that I was choking at a sink in San Francisco at about 11 p.m. one night in 1973, and I couldn't stop from choking. And I found out the next day from my brother that 3,000 miles away, my father was choking on his own blood at the same time. It was 2 a.m. in Delaware when it was happening, and I found my reaction was still, as a scientist, is how can that be? And I think some of these events do that to people. They become curious about it because they're somewhat open to the idea that strange things may happen. So is that possible? That I think that you get a subset of people who are scared by it, which I get some of too.
Maybe at the very beginning, but some people sort of get used to it. And even though they don't understand it, but all their life they continue to, or they seem to continue to have these phenomena. And I think actually is probably the origin of how some people get into be psychic counselors or mediums, because they of the childhood experience. We do the history of people you talk to. That's the other thing I'd like to explore even further. And with your questionnaire, you may be looking at this too. What's the history of the childhood, the parents, what are their experiences of other people around them, or how were they treated, of course, as you know, as a psychiatrist. I have to think of, who Joe McMoneagle is.
Sure.
Right. And Joe tells the story in his own book, and he's told us that when he was a child, he and his twin sister both had this kind of ability, but they agreed not to talk about it. It wouldn't have fit in with the family's dynamics, and in fact, they got punished if they said anything. He kept quiet. She began to talk as a teenager of what she thought was going to happen. Her parents took her to a psychiatrist, and she got medicated. Now, his version is that he thinks she got walked into being mentally disturbed by the treatment.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to interrupt now. I want to be able to talk about just that. We'll be back after a short break.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back to CC with BB. I'm Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD, your host, and we are here with Sally Rhine Feather and Susan Freeman from the Rhine Institute in Durham, North Carolina. Welcome. I'm so glad to have you on the program, and the place that we are talking about is the interface between psychosis and psi experiences, and how people get treated but for their psi experiences as psychotic. And we're talking about Joe McMoneagle, who's a wonderful clairvoyant. This guy could look around the world and tell you what was going on at great distance from where he was. And he didn't talk about it, but his sister did. And Sally, please continue what happened after that.
Well, things did not go well for her in her life. But he feels, in that regard, I don't know how it ended up for her, but although the day that she died of a heart attack, he knew it. hundreds of miles away and got in his car. He knew something was wrong and went to her bedside. But that was, he felt that lack of understanding in her early environment frightened her, maybe, and led to other things. Whereas he just kept quiet about it.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's a part I didn't understand. They were both, let's say, clairvoyant, among other things.
Yes.
He stopped. He didn't talk about it. She did.
Yes.
Her parents reacted negatively to that. So it was her parents' reaction that helped make her crazy in some form or another.
Yes, exactly. It wasn't and I'm glad you clarified that. It was not the ability. And if you know Joe, there's nobody saner than him.
Oh, gosh.
So it was not the ability, and of other gifted people we know, we don't see that correlation of the truly gifted. Of course, I'm not talking about the misunderstandings that sometimes people think they are psychic when clearly there's no evidence of their stories really being more than imagination. And we all occasionally are subject to that. So it is difficult to know at first, the very first experiences you have, what's real and what could be a true coincidence when it's just an accident. Not everything that happens is psychic, and not everything do we think.
Yeah, I'd like to get examples, not now necessarily, of ones where they're coincidental in the mere coincidence thing, that they're probability or random events that come together, and when that it's probably evidence of a psychic ability. How do you make that distinction now that I think about it?
Well, in a way, we don't really have to, Bernie, because or Dr. Beitman.
Bernie.
We don't have
Bernie.
If somebody my mother set the credentials. Now, this was new because in the old days, 100 years ago, in England, they were very, very careful, and they did close examinations of cases and only accepted those that had been vetted very, very carefully. She thought the wide net approach would be best. Just let's keep in our collection everything that seems to be psychic, but if it comes from apparently sane individual. Now, and the letters and the calls, well, they came by postal mail, then by emails now, and you can read a letter or two, and you can decide, this one goes in the rejects because this person doesn't sound grounded enough that we could trust their reporting. Could be just the way they're reporting it, but we do reject some and for our collection, but mostly they come from sane, normal people like you and me and our neighbors, and we accept it as a possibility if it fits the criteria for what we would call ESP, predicting something that would happen or is happening without the use of the known senses or just from inference.
I have a bit of an example, a personal experience that just happened yesterday, which I thought was kind of interesting. I was telling Sally, yesterday morning I was here at work and I had your book and the papers, some notes in front of me, and I get 90% of the calls that come to the Rhine from people who are trying to ask help for their experiences. And this woman called, and she repeatedly referred to her experiences as coincidence and synchronicity. Now, I'm going to say this truthfully. I have never had a person call and use the words coincidence and synchronicity so many times in the entire time I've been talking to people, except for yesterday morning, right before, as I'm looking at these things to get ready for this talk. And I thought that was a very interesting coincidence that someone should be coming and calling their experiences coincidences as opposed to what we might look at as ESP.
Unless she was a plant from your radio show.
And she, in a way, probably she was. I mean, I've had a series of coincidences related to the radio show, something like this, but I haven't heard one for a while. So thanks for telling me, because this activity. This radio show, I think sometimes stimulates coincidences around it. It's kind of like a tarot card that I used to like, the Princess of Cups, where she would be dancing, just swirling, and then crystalline forms would form on the hem of her skirt. She didn't do it on purpose. It was just her motion that made it happen. And I think activities like this radio show, tend to do something like that. They make coincidences more likely. They don't make them happen. So thank you for that one. I think those things are happening, and I sometimes get to hear about them.
It was very interesting for me because I couldn't relate any kind of ESP to it at all. I didn't call it to me in any way, so to speak. So
that's indirectly you did. Because
well, yes, I mean
communicating.
Energy flows where attention goes. So I'm not surprised, but it was very interesting.
One of the things that one of you said earlier was about the different channels through which information comes to people. And using the Ruth example, and again, the story of Ruth was the mother comes home. Ruth is 6 years old, and Ruth isn't there, and the babysitter doesn't know where she is, and next door neighbor doesn't, and then her mother just blindly, apparently, without feeling, which we hear stories like this other plenty of times, ends up by a huge pool, a quarry that the 6-year-old and her friend were going to go swimming in or go wading in, and it was very deep right there at the edge, and the mother got there in time. And whether the mother had been there before or not was not clear from the report, but somehow the mother got to that place. And the way you were saying that people get to places like that, sometimes it's kinesthetic, which is what it sounded like here. So the body seemed to be moving there without very much conscious attention. Sometimes it's a vision that you need to go to this place, so you get that. And sometimes it's a voice telling you to go to this place.
The voice. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those voices are what make a psychiatrist a little bit uncertain, of course, because hearing voices means you're psychotic. Mm-hmm. And Winston Churchill heard voices. Plenty of well-known and successful people hear voices. I hear voices occasionally in reporting some places, and I hear other people hearing voices that are guidance kind of voices for them. Where do you think these voices come from?
They were the most frequently reported cases in my mother's collection of among the what she would call hallucinations. And you don't like to use that word, but there isn't a better one that includes the things, the touching, the feeling, the hearing, the seeing. The voices were the most common, but I don't think she ever was able to get much further than that, whether the voices seemed to come from someone living or dead. Some of them came from living, from Aunt Susie's calling me, and she's living, but she tells me that my grandmother's died or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
well, some of the voices seem disembodied and
yes.
are not identified as coming from anyone in particular.
No.
And the range of possibilities are fairly large, and it depends on just what your preferred mode of explanation is. What do you? Well, there are a range of them. So how do you understand voices? How do you tell people to think about them?
It's sort of put into context with the story.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's how they explain it and how they connect with it. I mean, sometimes you say, I heard a voice, and you have to say, did you really hear a voice, or did the words pop into your head and you associated it as must have heard a voice? I have an example around that. A man told a story. He was driving a long distance with his infant child in the back seat, and he was alone. And all of a sudden, the radio was off. All of a sudden, he heard a voice, a very strong, dominant male voice, say, pay attention to what you're doing. Well, what he was doing was falling asleep at the wheel. And the voice, so-called voice, jolted him, and he could only reason and rationalize that it had to be a state patrolman who saw him falling asleep at the wheel and talked through the radio that was off. And he had to justify it in some way because he could not wrap his head around the fact that he received this information. So he just to this day will say that he heard the voice. It was an officer through the radio that was off. But he woke up, and that was the point.
Well, I don't know how far to go with this, but you get me very curious about the current status of theory about psi events.
Mm.
I'm going to let Sally. Sally and I are looking at each other.
Yeah, you take that.
Yeah,
one.
well, I bring that.
I'm not clear on your question there. It's hard to isolate current versus historic.
Well, I mean, the cumulative to the present. I've seen many different theories presented as possible ways of explaining psi events, and none of them seem to get any traction. There's quantum physics, quantum mechanics. Dean Radin has made some use of in trying to describe them. There have been other attempts. I mean, we get the guardian angels sometimes. I have an idea that I call the psychosphere, that's our mental atmosphere, that is a medium through which we can communicate with each other and get information in ways that we don't usually understand. And I mean by that something that is local to Earth, not something that is out there in the universe, but it's something that's studyable, I think, within the context of our human minds on this planet.
I like that. That's an interesting concept. How would that relate to Larry Dossey's one mind? Was that more of that's a broader, or Jung's collective unconscious?
Larry's ideas are much broader. I mean, it's still universe. It's still that consciousness is everywhere. That the one that we have emerged from is the origin of this consciousness of which we are a part. And I can see that, and I can begin to think about that way. But I'd like to be able to study where we're here on Earth, communicating with each other and with plants and with animals and with Mother Earth and the winds and rain and all kinds of things that seem to be somehow consciously connected to us if we pay attention to it. So that's why I prefer to stay here on Earth, and I've got some ideas about how that might be. But we'll come back to maybe this subject and other subjects as we come to the end of this segment. But it's so important for telepathy, for psi and coincidence, to have a theory that people can imagine about how it works. So we'll come back.
When you come to speak to us here, as you're going to next month,
I'll be there. We'll be back after a short break.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Welcome back to CC with BB, Connecting with Coincidence with Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD. That's me. Our guests today are Sally Rhine Feather and Susan Freeman from the Rhine Institute in North Carolina, and we're here trying to understand how to understand psi events, telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, and I would add psychokinesis. And I'd still like to be able to talk before we get more theory about PMIR, psi-mediated instrumental responses. That's a Rex Stanford idea that I call human GPS, somehow getting to a place you need to get to without really knowing how you got there. That some guidance intuitively, and intuitive covers a lot of things, voices, visions, feeling, gets you to where you need to go. Do you include, you must get stories like that, and how do you think about them?
We do get stories like that, and they're remarkable to read and to perceive, but really they're all a part of this whole ESP. I mean, however it's measured or however it's reported, it's that they're doing just that. They're getting somewhere or doing something that they don't understand how. And I wanted to touch base with a little bit of something that we said just before we ended. Jim Carpenter's book, First Sight.
First Sight, yeah.
Really sort of, it's a remarkable and very deep book, but it really says that it's our first sight, not our sixth sense. So our honing and homing skills are our first sight that we have. I think maybe everybody has them, and unfortunately we tend to lose them the older we get, and depending on our lifestyle and the culture that we live in. But really, it's a natural instinct, I think. If we were paying attention on your sensitivity scale, I would imagine a highly sensitive person would be using their innate skills.
Yeah.
And not freaked out about it.
I think that might connect with what you were saying about this psychogenic or psychological world that we're all in. And because we do know it seems to occur among people who know or care about each other more often than strangers, except in times of crisis.
Well, I wanted to get to that. Thanks. The conditions under which psi events or coincidences.
Sure.
When I use coincidences, it's really a cover word for a lot of other things.
Okay.
It's a cover word that says, hey, there might be something else going on here. There might be something going on here that we have not quite yet considered. That coincidences suggest to us explanations, that we need to look for explanations for things that are happening to all of us. And can we start accumulating enough stories to be able to find explanatory models for them? So it's a word that's out there in the general public, so that it doesn't hit with any kind of the loaded meaning sometimes that psi or ESP takes with him, or even synchronicity can do sometimes, and that word has gotten very expanded too to mean too many different things. So a friend of mine calls the circumstances of high coincidence likelihood as coincidentiality. So what are the circumstances that increase psi events? They have to do with people who are emotionally bonded to each other, you just mentioned. Also, times of crisis, there are coincidences or telepathy or psi events are more likely to happen. What other conditions seem to increase the likelihood of psi events?
Well, I think in childhood, mother-child cases are just father-child too are a large number of those, and that's the most intense time of life, perhaps, in terms of connections.
Well, one interesting thing, we mentioned it in danger or in something. Most of our stories are about something going on, a psi event happening, a change of events, and a different outcome. And in other words, they changed the course of events because of this one particular experience that they had. It's like changing fate almost. Mostly beneficial. They stopped a huge problem or a death or something like that. So I don't know how you set those things up. Who knows, the car's coming through the red light, but it's the reaction that you have at the moment. And those are, I don't know that we could figure out how that happens, except for back again to someone who pays attention and has conviction when they get these hits, so to speak.
Right. The people we're talking to are the people who acted in some cases, although many of them report in fact, my mother did a study, comparing when is fate inevitable. So she looked at the numbers and so forth. But in terms of the people we hear from, it's most of the people who have been saved and affected at times of crisis. And the modern day case that's the most common is avoiding a car crash. So we had to count them up, and we haven't done it, but just intuitively I know that, knowing what the car's coming down, you're avoiding a huge crash.
But when you look at the people who didn't go to work at 9/11, who didn't get on an airplane, who don't get on trains, on train wrecks, how did that happen on that day that all those same people had the same idea about being late at that moment to avoid that situation?
Yes. You're implying also stories that you've heard many more than I, of a person who got a message about someone being in danger and didn't follow it, like a person down the street who hadn't seen for quite a while, but had the feeling of wanting to go visit right now, but then stopped herself from doing the visit and then found out the next day that person had committed suicide.
Yeah,
that's a huge turn of events in what we call a psi experience, is whether you have the conviction to act on your perception or not. It's a turning point. It's like, okay, here's a very clear-cut case, and conviction is a major component of that.
You get people calling you up who maybe have the drive, as this person did in this story, but had too much rationality to not respond to it. Yes. So the conviction might have been said strong, but not strong enough to overcome the rationality. And then you must hear people feeling guilty about not having acted.
Right, that we do, yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a tendency for people who are overly rational, the logical person, not to have as many or report as many psychic experiences as the more freely creative, artistic. That's fairly well documented even in the laboratory studies.
People don't talk about not doing something as much as they talk about having done it. I think that their feelings of sadness or guilt might feel so bad. They might feel so badly about not following through that we don't get many reports about, I wish I had done something.
Yeah, that's their first experience after they've messed up. Then they have, think of Marie, the one who reports so many in my book. After the first mistake early in life, she remembered, and the next one she paid attention to. There's some learning from people who I think are gifted.
Yeah, let's talk about the people who are gifted, because like a lot of things, some people are better at psi things than others, and some people are better at telepathy than clairvoyance, and some people are better at psychokinesis than they are at any of the other ones. So how do you characterize people, besides the fact that they may not be so rational, although Joe McGonigal was certainly one of the most rational guys you want to run into.
Right, on the one hand.
But on the one hand, yeah.
I think, he's got his... I don't know. That's a good question. I'll have to. He's coming down in a couple of weeks. I'll have to ask him that question directly.
It's certainly we have a lot of people come to the Rhine that are very, very gifted in one skill or the other. Lots of mediums, psychics, people offering their skill sets for us to research, which we don't really do one-on-one like that too much. And you listen to the stories about when they knew that they had this ability, how they developed it, were they born with it, but how do we classify them? I don't know. But it might be normal around here.
There's a lot we have to do.
It might just be more normal here than other places.
Yeah, right.
The new norm. Yeah, that's good. I hope you expand that to a larger population.
Well, you're helping too.
Yes, thank you. I'm trying to be part of the same thing. Now, you mentioned medium. Now, mediums is not the usual psi sort of thing. That's connecting with somebody who's passed over, supposedly.
That's true.
And so but you do deal with medium activity as well. Is that right?
Yes, we find the mediums that have come here are fairly psychic for living people as well as for the deceased. And that's a whole nother chapter we didn't have time to get into today. We do have a number of experiences, of course, that come to us which suggest survival. You could look at it different, but there won't be time to go into all that.
Well, I'm going to summarize what I think you might say in a different way, is that mediums aren't picking up somebody who's passed over, but picking up information about them from people who are living.
We're not sure.
Mm-hmm. Could be both. We're
not
both.
sure. The mediumship falls under one of the 5 categories that we would say we study here, and would be under the survival category, which is the fact that someone's personality or consciousness or spirit remains after physical death. I think J.B. Rhine started out trying to research that, but it's really not easy. I think Windbridge Institute is one of the only places that has done abundant studies on mediumship, but it does fall under the survival category. The 5 categories that we do study are clairvoyance, telepathy, precognition, psychokinesis, and survival. So that's the areas that we stick with. It's not orbs, it's not aliens, it's not Loch Ness Monster, and it's not ghosts, but although ghosts get in there under survival.
Of course they do. Yeah. Of course they do. Well, we're getting to the end of our program, and it's been a delight having both of you here. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Sally, for being here with me, and I'll see you in a month or so.
Yeah, thank you.
Look forward to hearing more.
Good. Over and out.